All right, so I'm here today with Shari and Luke and Jess, and we've decided that we're going to tackle having a conversation on the recent a conversation about a conversation. We're going to do a little analysis of the recent conversation that Jordan Peterson had with Ian MacGilchrist. And we're going to play some clips from that, and then we're going to talk about that. And I've kind of like given everyone permission to just sort of like start talking if they have something to say, and I will pause the clip when they start talking. So is there anything anyone wants to say as sort of an interview or introduction before I drop into the first clip?
So a couple things.
Okay.
We can't wait for Paul to do a commentary on this because we'll be waiting too long. So we'll just do it ourselves, Paul. And also,
He can do a commentary on our commentary.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we all, I don't know, everybody, he did a commentary on Stephen Fry, which I thought was good, the Jordan Peterson Stephen Fry conversation. But I think we all probably thought, and Nate, I know you explicitly have said this a couple of times, and I mean, and I think this too, that the MacGilchrist conversation is more important because really, I mean, I think what
Yes.
MacGilchrist is saying in
And
The
it-
Master and the Emissary is like,
And it may have something to do with blackbirds, and I may mention it later.
ooh,
Blackbirds.
it's what MacGilchrist is saying is really maybe like the most concise, clear, propositional work that could help the modern world with what's wrong with our consciousness.
Yeah.
Well, I would say if I were to give a summary of what McGilchrist is doing, McGilchrist has found a way to talk about spirit that materialists can understand.
Yes, yeah, and Jordan Peterson is kind of a bridge there because Jordan Peterson also, my wife said this the other day and I thought it was a good insight. He's able to talk about science in a very modernist scientistic way, but in a way that transcends the science. And so these people in MacGilchrist terms who have kind of a lopsided left brain are still able to just peer into what Jordan Peterson is saying. But ultimately Jordan Peterson is truly what I would call a mystic because he acknowledges and submits to the transcendent. He submits to what he doesn't yet see and understand.
Yeah, I think that comes through more in his newer book than his previous book, particularly in chapter 8, which I might want to discuss at some point. I think that's like the best chapter in his new book, because he's thinking about beauty, and this is like, it's kind of like culturally we've become so obsessed with the idea of objective truth that we have lost touch with beauty, and how beauty is also like connected to truth, and that it's this pursuit of truth with a loss of the importance of beauty and goodness that has kind of caused our breakdown, because it's only this left brain rational idea of truth that we're valuing, which isn't really that's not the whole of truth. And the whole of truth involves the connection of truth, beauty, and goodness together. And I think, and I mean, the language that McGilchrist is framing it in is language that is, I would say, accessible to rationalists, but it's using language that's accessible to rationalists to point beyond rationalism, I would say.
Right. Which is my favorite things. One last thing, damn it, then we'll get started. So this is why, like everything you just said, I think everybody's familiar, and I quote it all the time, but Dostoevsky is beauty will save the world. That's why he said that, is because he realized, I think, in this post-enlightenment coming burgeoning modernist world that we are now just is ubiquitous everywhere in the consciousness, this objectivist kind of pursuit of truth, Dostoevsky just saw that on the very front end, and so he realized that beauty would be our gateway to a fuller, what I would call a more noetic, complete man vision. Because I try to say stuff like that sometimes. Like I say, because people will say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and so I say evidence and facts are in the eye of the beholder, and people just look at me like I'm an asshole. But I think it's what I'm trying to do is get at kind of poetic diction, and I'm trying to use somewhat, I don't know, destabilizing language that just makes people look at me askew, because I don't think that that's untrue what I'm saying, but I think it hits a modernist, it hits their ears in a way that is discordant.
Right.
MacDonald calls poetry truth in beauty.
Yeah, I think I have in my notes. I don't know if I'll get around to do it, but poetic diction is one of the, at some point, is like one of the things that I wanted to talk about in relation to one of the clips. So let me go ahead and let's go ahead and get into the first clip here. And everybody let me know if you can hear okay.
One of the things I was
Is everybody able to hear?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and play, and if someone has something to say, just go ahead and interrupt, and I'll pause.
reading the introduction to your new book this morning, and I was struck by many different topics, but I was particularly interested in your conception of attention. And so you talk about attention as something that in some sense brings things into being. I don't think that's a misreading of your writing. And maybe I could get you to expound on that a bit and to tell me what you think attention is, because I've had a hell of a time differentiating it from fluid intelligence, for example, or from consciousness, or like, it's a word that makes sense when you hear it in the context of a bunch of other words, but when you extract it out from that context and try to grip it, it falls apart in your grasp. So
I think one could say that attention is the way in which the individual disposes his or her attention. It's a disposition of one's consciousness. So attention is how you dispose your consciousness towards the world. And when I was researching The Master and His Emissary, the book that's now 10 years old, I came across this fascinating thing that one of the most fundamental differences between the hemispheres is their way of attending. And it didn't entirely hit me at the time how important it is. But we can talk about that later. But you were asking the rather sort of interesting philosophical question about how attention helps to bring things into being. And I think it does, both generally and rather in a very particular sense in the left hemisphere. Generally, what I mean is that how you attend to the world depends, on that depends what world you find. Qualities of the world that comes to your attention is determined by the quality of the attention you bring to it. And
so that's a very significant statement. I was talking to someone the other day who's somewhat theologically minded, and he was also very interested in the role that attention played in constituting the world. I mean, you pay attention to things that you value one way or another. And what that means is that the world tends to manifest itself in relationship to your value structure. And that's a very troublesome idea in some sense with regards to our conceptions of the objective world, because it's not easy to parse out what's objective when what manifests itself to you is dependent in large part on what you value. It's very complicated to sort that all out.
Well, possibly very much later, we can come to the question of what objective and subjective mean and how one can I think it's a mistaken dichotomy. I think one can interpret the words in important ways that give them meaning. But I think to think of the just being an objective world out there and a subjective world in here is one of the problems with modern Western philosophy. But to come back to the creation of the world, I was going to say that not only does it sort of bring into the world that you know, which is, after all, by definition, the only world you will ever know, but it also changes who you are. So the quality of the attention you pay changes you, the attender. So it's a very profound difference. And in the first book, The Master and His Emissary, one of the things I was expounding was how this business of attention creates a whole distinct world. So the hemispheres have evolved to two different sets of values. You mentioned values, and it's very germane. They have different reasons for existing, and therefore have different things they respond to. And what I have tried to explain in that book is that this gives rise to a whole way of seeing the world, and a whole world which is not just for the individual, but also at times it becomes the way of looking at the world for a whole culture. Because of course, we're, as individuals, never entirely distinct from our culture.
Okay. Oh, no interruptions. I'm surprised.
That's called self-control on my
Wow, I really am surprised with this collection of people that not anyone felt any desire to interrupt. Anyone have any particular thoughts on that part of the discussion?
So there's a couple things I would like to bring out, and I mean, again, I say this all the time, but what I think cliff notes of what you could summarize of what they just said is this quote that I love from C.S. Lewis, The Magician's Nephew. It's one of my favorite of his. But what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing. It also depends upon the kind of person you are. Like, that's essentially what he's saying. Your value and attention is what that gives rise to what you see. That's what pops forth out of the infinity of what is possible to see, what you value. And so that gets into the subjective objective dichotomy. And then it also made me think of, because he was talking about that happens individually and it also happens collectively. So have you guys seen the movie, the documentary, The Social Dilemma? A lot of people talked about it.
I heard a lot about it, but I didn't see it. It's
So
about like the social media stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's basically one of the big points they make, the main guy in the film, I don't know if he's the filmmaker, but that he makes is that a lot of people in social media get really mad, and they'll say things like, they'll get mad at whatever side is opposed to them. And they'll be like, what world are you looking at? Like, how are you not seeing this? Like, why are you denying reality? And he said, one of the things that they've shown though, is that, well, that's what social media is doing. It sets up its algorithms to show you a certain set of things based on what's going to get clicks and make money. And that's how the whole thing is set up. And it's showing other people a completely different world. So very literally, it is showing you two completely different worlds. And people are just mad because they are just like, what's going on?
Well, isn't that itself a sign of a cultural breakdown? Because like in a healthy functioning culture, you wouldn't really have that much disagreement about things that are like just that base level, right? You wouldn't have people looking at the same set of information and coming to radically different.
No, but that's my point. The social dilemma's point is they're not looking at the same information.
Okay.
The social media algorithms are showing them completely different things. So like if you're inclined to the left, it will show you left affirming studies. And if you're inclined, like I'm just saying politically, because that's how the modern world basically is functioning now. And then if you're inclined to the right, it will show you those things. And then both people are just like, why is the other side crazy? Like, don't they see all these facts and information? But it's showing you different things.
Because what they're paying attention to becomes reality for them, and they can't.
Yes.
Right.
But that's happening through the social media. However, I think what MacGilchrist is saying is like that also happens like whatever, throw out social media. That's happening in social media, but that also happens in your own mind and in your own cultures, individually and collectively. You see different worlds based on what you value.
Right. Which has a lot of, like, if you start thinking about the kinds of things that we pay attention to in our culture, that has a lot, has some harrowing kind of implications, because the lot of time, a lot of the things we spend our energy attending to is not very good for us. So does anyone have anything to say about the subject object dichotomy?
Well, I had a question actually. He said at one point the quality of attention you bring to it.
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
Yeah, can we expand on that? Because like, if you are basically being duped by your own ability to attend, how can you bring a quality to it? Like, this is the thing that I'm wondering.
Well, there are modes of, not only that, but there are modes of attention. That's why I wanted to get, this is why I kind of wanted to bring up the subject object dichotomy for a moment, because attending to something as an object and attending to something as a subject are completely different modes.
Right.
And as much as you are, and if you are attending to things merely as objects, oh boy, is that a problem. And the tendency of our rational left brain slanted view of the world is that we overwhelmingly choose to attend to everything as an object, and we attend to less and less things as a subject. And in fact, even the human person is being gradually emptied of all subjectivity, so that it really just becomes like a hollow, like just a hollow man that's not really anything.
Well,
Right.
I think that the like the whole identitarian stuff is an objectification of individuals.
Yes.
Totally.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. It's non-personal, it's non-relational, and it's completely objective.
But
Like-
that's this. So this is all connected to. Paul has said this many times. Like, people are meant to be loved, not to be used. Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the opposite of identitarianism and objectification of people. And you can, like, if you objectify a woman, people talk about that. Well, you're treating her like an object. Well, that's a dead, materialistic, non-communal world. But you can do that with anything. You can treat this, and this is why I think your bigger, broader, general point, Nate, about the subject object thing, is that when you are fundamentally in that frame of philosophical materialism, where things are not alive and either imbued with, like, whatever, panpsychism or the breath of God or whatever, if you don't view things as iconic and to some degree alive in God, the trees clapping their hands.
Yeah, you need to. Yes, exactly. So the reason that the subject object raw dichotomy is wrong is because everything has both a view in and a view out, to use Harding's language.
Yeah, that's what like when the dichotomy arises, I think, when you keep those two things separated, which is kind of illustrated in the corpus callosum itself.
Yes.
Right? So, you've got this subjective, objective view of worldview.
Can you clarify corpus callosum for those of us who may not be familiar with the term?
Well, it's that thing that separates the two hemispheres of the brain.
Okay. All right.
The bridge of meaning.
Okay. The bridge of meaning.
The thing that connects the map to the territory.
Oh,
Yeah.
you just gave the whole bridges of meaning name a whole new layer of relevancy to me.
There it is.
What, in terms of how to conceive of what is being bridged.
We'll see what all the meme kings do with that.
But all this, like this stuff has just huge ramifications. So you can apply it just relationally to people. I mean, it's obvious to see, like, if you treat your spouse or a family member as an object, that's not going to work very well. That's not going to create communion. But if you treat the things that you buy and consume, if you treat nature, to bring in like Tolkien, if you treat the forests, like like they're objects to be used for your own advantage, for your pursuit of power, you'll rip them all down, and then the world becomes full of dead objects rather than things that you are in communion and relationship with, and the whole world becomes dead. But I don't think, like, this is
there's a certain, like, and in order to do certain, like, in order to do certain things within science, like, that's a necessary move, right? If you're viewing an animal as a genuine subject, you can't vivisect it. In fact, vivisection is an ironic term, because in order to vivisect something, you have to see it as already dead. Otherwise, you couldn't do the vivisection. You have to be able to see it as a dead object in order to be able to vivisect it.
Mhm.
And that's all tied to like viewing the world mechanistically, parts that make up a whole, rather than seeing things as it's fundamentally, well, here we go. Number one, Luke bingo, mosaic vision, because that's the like, well, this is Paul, all his tropes that he does all the time. That's mine. But like, it's really, these are ways that I use to illustrate mosaic vision. It's viewing the world subjectively objective. It's both of them at the same time. And so when you when you view something as unities of multiplicity, which I would argue that's actually how perception works, which is why I like Barfield, like getting back to perception, not just ideas. That is how you see. You see with value, and you see wholes. You don't just see. Only the left brain divides and dissects things into parts. You fundamentally see with your vision wholes. That's how you see. You don't do, your mind isn't doing the calculus of all these parts come together and there's a lamp. You just see a lamp, or you see a tree, or you see unities.
I think so. Like, for me, because I kind of see the world that way. Like, I, not to beat my drum or anything, but I have always felt connected. Like, everything is a subject to me, right? And so when I was listening to him talk about that, I can understand. Like, I can see people doing that, treating things like, when you look at animal behavioral science, for example, I'm always so frustrated by it, because they see the animal as an object and not a subject, right?
Right.
They don't, it's not something that they're interacting with that's making them, right? Like, this is the thing, like the lamp. I have a lamp, and the lamp makes me who I am. If I didn't have a lamp, I would be a different person.
And think,
right?
Shari, but think, and when you if you're able to actually adopt that view and to start thinking in that mode, think about what that does and what that makes of the role of the human being as the mediator between heaven and earth.
Well, I just wanted to read something from Harding, because I think that this is really kind of interesting, and we might be able to talk about it. But
go for it.
He says here, a theology is the forerunner which prepares the way for philosophy and for all the sciences. The ideas of nature and cosmic order, of freedom and necessity, of personality, and very much else derived from our historical preoccupation with the divine. Now, this is the part that I think is kind of interesting. Human love itself came down from heaven. It is not that the gods are anthropomorphic, but rather that man is theomorphic. We know him through them. The visions of Newton and Einstein contribute to the beatific vision, but only because they are, as a matter of fact, its fission products. So what I think is interesting here is that we anthropomorphize the world. Like, Tolkien anthropomorphized the trees to illustrate to us that they are not objects, but that they are subjects, right?
We should, right.
But we need to be seeing, we need to understand that we are not anthro, we are theo. We are made in the image of God, right? And if we see the world that way, then everything becomes a subject.
Yeah,
And
there's a
Go
way
ahead.
in which he's talking about the quality of the attention you give forms the world, but it's a relationality, and just like what you were saying, Shari, about you and your relationship with your lamp. When you attend to something, it attends to you.
Right.
Mhm.
And so like we can't take ourselves out of the attending. If attending is making the world, what attends to you makes you.
Yes.
And so you know, and it also, because we know this, like with the orphan kids in Ukraine, I think it was, where they were fed, they were given cribs, shelter, but they weren't given attention, and they all suffered basically catastrophic neurological damage that none of them recovered from. And the best cases made it out, and they had severe problems their whole life, like psychological problems, because they were never given attention. Like just the basic thing. They were given everything else. They weren't given attention.
Well, they
And
were
so-
never made. They were never made.
Right. They never became.
Right.
And so the world, the divine, the universe is paying attention to you in a way. And you know, but it's because if you realize that like God's a good father, if that's what's paying attention to you at the foundational level or at the highest level, then that shapes how you pay attention to everything else. You know, it's not just that if I change my mindset, I'll be able to attend better and then the world will manifest itself differently to me. It's almost like a level deeper. It's like, what do I think is attending to me? And then
Yes.
that affects how I attend to things.
Right.
Right, and it's also how right, and it's that attention. It's that attention that raises things up the hierarchy of being. And here's the other thing that occurs to me, while you were talking, like Jess, in light of what you were just saying, what do you think the connection is between the concept of attention and love? It occurs to me as you're talking that love is a particularly elevated, high quality form of attention.
Right.
It's
I was
a good
thinking-
question.
Yeah. When Jess was talking about, when he was describing that interaction, I was thinking about agape, because agape is the love that transforms, that brings someone into being.
Right, and when you're and to love someone is to attend to them in the most high quality way possible. Like
Right.
that's what you're doing, and to do that in the most high quality way possible requires that you sacrifice yourself so that you're full. This is why you have to sacrifice yourself, because if you don't sacrifice yourself, your full attention cannot be on the other.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, and that gets into the kind of, well, Harding again, his 4 stages of development. I mean, that's essentially like it is a reemergence of a heightened, elevated, self-aware, the infant level, where you're just almost pure perception, but you have no self-consciousness. But then it's a resubmission of that self, that I, that self-identity completely to the other. And that's actually what it is to, I mean, you could,
But I would say that
active listening or anything. To hear someone, you have to disappear to truly hear someone.
right. So the seer stage has childlike qualities in that in terms of its openness, but the seer is actually developed beyond the child.
Yes.
Because the child is actually, I mean, if you think about a child is like sort of a receptacle for attention and is open to everything.
Yes.
But the seer is able to attend fully to the other in the way that a child cannot.
Well,
So the importance of the child is the being childlike part is gaining the vision that allows you to become a seer.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I think even I like the term father and child better because like a seer kind of is above the child and doesn't need the child, but a father actually needs the child. When my kids attend to me, I'm a dad.
Mhm.
If I don't have my kids, I'm not a dad.
Right.
So there's a way in which my attention forms them, and makes them become, but also their attention towards me does the same. Like it's a reciprocal relationship. And now there's a hierarchy in play, of course, because
Right.
I'm a father and they're a child. So this isn't like everyone's equal, and there's definitely a hierarchy, but it's a reciprocal one. And I guess that's where love comes into play, because
And it's a reciprocity of pure gift.
right.
And the ultimate source of that is God.
Yeah, exactly. And even like I think even more foundationally, like if we're trying to like, if I'm attending to the world wrong, I'm not going to change that by disciplining myself to attend to things correctly.
No.
Maybe I'll make there's some progress to be made there. I think the main progress is to be made by I have been attended to incorrectly, and I don't understand the depth of the love of God that has attended to me from the beginning. I don't understand that. And then you should be pursuing the revelation of how God attends to you. And that'll change everything, I think.
Right. Right.
So, Jess,
I
would
mean,
you
it's
say
kind of
that
psychoanalytic or something.
is that kind
No,
of
but I think there's something really right about what you're saying, because it's like you have to, like, in order to know this highest quality mode of attention that we give the name love, right? In order
Mhm.
to attend to people in that mode, in that self, you have to have seen it.
Yeah.
You have to have seen it somewhere.
It has to be attention towards you.
Correct.
And
yes?
you have to
So,
see it as towards you, because you can.
So you're saying if you're going around, if you believe that you're just you're a fully depraved piece of shit, that you won't ever actually be able to see that?
Oh.
so wait a minute now. I just want to ask this.
Sorry, Calvinists. I love you. Even
Now
if
I
you don't
lost
love me.
For yourselves.
Okay, so what am I getting this right, Jess? So you're saying, um,
So what you're saying is that
that you have to see yourself the way God sees you.
well, primarily as one attended to, and then you can attend in a better way.
Right.
Like
So your perception of God matters. Like if
Yeah.
you think God is a judge, for example, then you would see yourself as a sinner, or a piece
and
of
then
shit.
you attend to the world as one that is judging.
Right.
And,
If
Well,
you
and
see God as
what this reminds me of, Jess, and I don't know, I mean, Shari and I both will be one of another bingo things, but the Rilke quote,
yeah, bingo.
the deepest experience of God is one of bearing and receiving, which is feminine.
Mhm.
And so it's not just like the gospel of just try harder, as I like to say, just like attend rightly, do the right,
Oh, yeah,
attend,
yeah.
fix your attention. What can I do? What do I need to do to fix my attention?
Exactly.
Your God, he's got you. Like, you're okay, just stop. Or it's Master Eckhart, I think, has a quote of like, the process of finding God happens not by addition, but by subtraction. Like, just stop.
I wonder how much. Oh boy, I'm gonna go there. I wonder how I have to. I wonder how much cutting. I wonder how much, like, underemphasizing the feminine aspect of God, which would give us access to that mother child level of attention, if we kept that feminine aspect in mind. I wonder how much of that has caused us to miss that part.
A
Oh,
lot.
because our vision of God is like, even though we know God intellectually, we know God is beyond, any predication of gender, like, and we know that there's lots of feminine language that's used about God within the scriptures. It's not like it's totally absent. Ruach is feminine in Hebrew. There are lots of motherly images used of God toward Israel in the Hebrew scriptures. Like the feminine imagery is there, but we've chosen to completely de-emphasize it. This is particular. I think this is less of a problem for Orthodox and Catholic believers than it is, I'd say, for Protestants. So, but I would say even there's still something missing even there.
Well,
Where
I actually think, though, Nate, that we've de-emphasized God as Father.
you think so, or we've misunderstood what a father is.
Perhaps, but I mean, when Jesus refers to God, he always refers to him as Father, right?
Yes.
If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right?
And which is very peculiar that he chooses that consistently, because there's
Yeah.
actually only, I think, 2 Hebrew scripture references to God as Father. It's very unusual.
Right.
I mean, it does occur within the Hebrew scriptures, but it's very atypical. It's not the normal.
But it's because Jesus is the Son,
Right.
right? Like he's appearing as a son, and
Right.
now God is a father, right? So, and Mary was the mother. So, you know, like God doesn't have a motherly role in that, you know, story.
Yeah, and I would say
the church provides a motherly role, I think, ideally.
Right.
The church is the mother, God is our father.
Yeah.
And the church is supposed to provide the space for you to be the balance between protection and freedom to become, and teach you how to, you know, both being attended to and teach you how to attend to things correctly.
You know, to get back to this idea of attention, we often have people, I find, who want to make the God of the Old Testament different than the God of the New Testament, right? But the idea is to bring those 2 together. And so, like, one of the things I noted when MacGilchrist started the talk was that he said, you know, we are designed to eat and not be eaten. And I thought to myself, okay, so we actually need dualism, right? We need, like, to survive, we need to have these, you know, these things. We need to see the world dualistically, let's say. But the game is to bring those things together in such a way, and this is what I think wisdom is, actually, because, you know, like he said, the left hemisphere doesn't know what it doesn't know. Like if it doesn't know something, that thing doesn't exist, period. Right?
Yeah. Hey, we haven't got to that part yet.
Okay. I really like that, Shari. That like we need, there's a purpose for dualisms.
Yeah.
Because we have to make decisions and you have to say yes to this and no to this. But ideally, what you want to do is bring everything together again, like in a whole picture somehow. And
right.
and the whole picture governs. The dualism doesn't govern, doesn't rule.
Right.
But this is, I would argue, to say with MacGilchrist, I understand your point, but this is why I just beat the drum of vision so much, because I really, and we talked about this the other day in the Boxer, I really do believe there is a way to perceive the world that is not dualistic, because dualistic is fundamentally left brain. If you're a dualist, the left brain's the master. It just, you're because it's on or off, it's a binary. The way to perceive I think the proper way to perceive the world, which gets you what dualism promises you but will never actually give you, is Trinitarianism, because it allows you to see options, to see difference, to see contrast, but to not be stuck in the binary on or off of it. So it allows you to correct your map. It allows you to have a map, but for it to be corrected by transcendence.
Yeah,
and you perceive the world that way.
Yeah, well, I don't think that. I think that I don't think that. I definitely would say that dualisms are not like depending on what you mean. Like if you're talking about just like the evolutionary division of the brain into two hemispheres, that's one thing. Um, that maybe just be a feature of evolutionary biology. But as MacGilchrist points out, it's not inevitable and hasn't always been the case that the left brain has dominated.
But here's what I mean to clarify. I'm not talking about the left, like the left and the right brain, but I'm saying the left brain is dualistic. The right brain is
I think
it's pre-articulate.
I think you're right, which is why I don't know if it's pre-articulate. Well, it can articulate on its own, yes.
Right. And so the dualism, so like thinking dualistically to say this or that can't exist in the right brain. Those are both explicit. Those are both left brain things.
Right.
The right brain is the thing that comes in that allows you, like when Peterson says air is transcendence manifesting to you, allowing you to correct your math.
But the right brain can use the left brain articulation as a tool, though. That's what poetic diction. That's what poetic diction is. And I would say that what MacGilchrist, when he's talking about these times in the past when we haven't been left brain dominant in the same way we are, he's pointing toward the same idea that Barfield's talking about when he talks about original participation. And we have become like the withdrawal of participation is really a historically rather recent development. Because if you go back and look at even the medieval model, which Peugeot was pointing toward all the time, it was we were not in the full withdrawal participation in the medieval period. The medieval period was a participatory time. In comparison to our current age. So this sort of like these stark dualisms, I really think are a product of left brain dominance.
Yeah, for sure.
Which has become more and more extreme over time.
Yeah, okay. But like I'm not advocating for dualistic approach to life. Like that's not what I'm saying.
No, you're saying that we need the left brain too, is what you're saying, which is why I wanted to offer a corrective. Because you're saying that that the left brain serves its function, it has its role, which MacGilchrist would agree to too. And obviously, I mean, we have a bicameral mind for some reason.
Well, I'm saying actually a little bit more than that because the left brain obviously poses a problem. The left hemisphere actually poses a problem, right? It can believe that it's the master and not the emissary. So what's the game then? Okay, so here we are, we have this brain, right? That's bifurcated, that has a corpus callosum, which is designed to hold things in tension, which is really great. I love that, right? And now it's like, okay, now you got to work with it. So, I was reminded when I was listening to all of this, how in Proverbs it says, with all of your, wisdom is supreme, right? With all of your getting of knowledge, get understanding. And it seems to me that understanding is when the master and the emissary are working in tandem. And there is no more weightedness on one side or the other. Like if you were only right-brained, you wouldn't be very functional. Right. There would be a lot of things you could maybe, understand your world. It wouldn't be confusing because it sees things as a whole, right? But you couldn't write, you probably couldn't talk properly. You may have trouble.
I don't think you could do anything, honestly. Well, you have to write brain.
Right. So again, you're in this, biblical story of bringing things under control, like bringing your passions under control, integration. I mean, that's the word that I always think of is a proper integration of these things. And so I guess when I said that previously, I was just pointing out that, in a very primeval way, we need our dualistic approach, right? We need to be able to hyper-focus on something and not, not think about how beautiful it is.
I just don't. Yeah,
I was approaching you.
Right. I just don't. I just want to avoid. I just want to avoid the idea. I don't want people to hear that and think that means that that means that dualisms are necessary.
No,
right?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
So I know that's not what you're saying. That's why I just want to make that clarification. That doesn't mean that, we just have to live. I think Paul would say that, and for example, but I don't think that's true. And I think that like I would think that we have all kinds of levels of argument. I think there's a sociological argument that demonstrates that that's not the case. There's a philological argument that demonstrates that that's not the case. You even have actually in the Stephen Fry Jordan Peterson conversation, Julian Jaynes was brought up, who makes like an evolutionary biology argument that like actually like the two hemispheres used to be integrated, like from an evolutionary standpoint. Which Barfield hated Jaynes, by the way, but in any case, it's still another piece of evidence from another way of looking at it that's pointing at the same idea, that it's that while we our brain is biologically divided into two hemispheres and they both have a necessary function, viewing the world through a dualistic lens is not necessary.
Yeah, we could. So I feel like we could do the whole conversation on dualism.
Yes, we could. It's a big deal.
I have a lot of things to say, because the thing is, I think a lot of times, one last thing that I would like to say on that subject is I think a lot of people, and this gets this, since all of my time in this community, this has been thrown at me as like the woo guy and the anti-propositional guy, and that people are like, you're anti-left brain, you're anti-confessions, you're anti-propositions, you're anti like seeing difference and dualism, and like it's just this big woo fuzzy nothingness thing. And
yeah.
I'm like, no, that's
how the left brain responds to those kinds of ideas, though.
Right, that has never been my point. And so even that, but like the dualisms, I think people construe it this way with the right and the left brain thinking, is they think the left brain has this option, the right brain has this option. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
Options are all in the left brain. Those are, the left brain is the thing that sees options and chooses.
It's the thing that categorizes.
Yes, the right brain has the totality. The right brain is the space that provides the options pre-verbally, pre-articulate. It's where everything comes from. It's right. The dream.
And the left brain is the reason that Sam, God bless him, is a Unitarian, because the left brain because the left brain cannot rest with the paradox of unity and multiplicity.
Yeah, you were talking about that the other day, and I think that's very, very true. The impulse, and this is just a temperament thing, I think primarily, the impulse to not be okay with not being able to articulate something, like that feeling of discomfort when there's something that you know.
This is what, yes, and so this is what when Barfield, following Coleridge, talks about imagination as a truth-bearing faculty, that's what he means.
Oh,
He's talking about being able to take that holistic vision that you see and just trust it.
Okay,
it is intimately connected to faith.
Yeah, do your quote, but yeah, there's a kind of vision. That's, people equate vision or seeing with articulation. Like if I see something, I can talk about it, I can explain it. No, vision's much bigger than that, way bigger.
Yeah, I think articulation, it has to do with laying out parts more than it does about seeing.
Yes, which is fundamentally left brain, parts versus wholes.
But poetic diction is different.
Yes, Shari.
I was going to throw this in with the idea of childlikeness and, science and philosophy, when MacGilchrist talks about science and philosophy, but I think it fits in here too. So I'm just going to read it. In the scientific region of her duty, of which we speak, the imagination cannot have her perfect work. This belongs to another and higher sphere than that of intellectual truth, that namely of full-globed humanity, operating in which she gives birth to poetry, truth in beauty. But her function in the complete sphere of our nature, and he's talking about imagination here, will at the same time influence her more limited operation in the sections that belong to science. Coleridge says that no one but a poet will make any further great discoveries in mathematics. And Bacon says that wonder, that faculty of the mind especially attendant on the childlike imagination, is the seed of knowledge. The influence of the poetic upon the scientific imagination is, for instance, especially present in the construction of an invisible whole from the hints afforded by a visible part, where the needs of the part, its uselessness, its broken relations, are the only guides to a multiplex harmony, completeness, and end, which is the whole. From a little bone, worn with ages of death, older than the man can think, his scientific imagination, dashed with the poetic, calls up the form, size, habits, periods, belonging to an animal never beheld by human eyes, even to the mingling contrasts of scales and wings, of feathers and hair. Through the combined lens of science and imagination, we look back into ancient times so dreadful in their incompleteness that it may well have been the task of seraphic faith, as well as of cherubic imagination, to behold in the wallowing monstrosities of the terror-teeming earth, the prospective quiet, age-long labor of God preparing the world with all its humble, graceful service for his unborn man. The imagination of the poet, on the other hand, dashed with the imagination of the man of science, revealed to Goethe the prophecy of the flower and the leaf. No other than an artistic imagination, however, fulfilled of science, could have attained to the discovery of the fact that the leaf is the imperfect flower. And what I liked about that quote was the fact that it's a perfect description of this integration of the left and the right hemisphere, right? Of them needing each other. Like, this is why I said in the beginning, like, and I totally get what Luke's talking about. I guess for me, I'm trying to understand why I need my left brain, because I don't use it very often, okay? And I'm starting to get the feeling that this is why I wonder about my body, because the left brain seems to be governed, or the left hemisphere seems to be governing the functionality of my life, right? My body. And my right brain it's not concerned itself with that. It sent the emissary off to do that work, right? And so I have that question because I don't do left brain very well. And it poses a problem for me.
No, so Shari, I think you do. So back earlier when we were saying, you need the left brain to do anything. You couldn't do anything if you didn't have the left brain. And I think it's because exactly what you just said, your left brain governs your body. But I think when you say you don't use your left brain, I think all you're articulating is that you just by nature and fundamentally, your right brain has always been the master, which is why I think you see differently. It's not that you don't use your left brain. You do it all the time because that's why you
can't write poetry without using both. Like,
right.
Because there's a reason why poetry is rooted in the image, right? So you're taking what you're doing when you're writing poetry is you're taking this holistic vision that the right brain sees, and you're trying to use language in a way that disrupts the left brain enough,
Mm-hmm.
which is the part of the brain that we use to
Well, maybe it's more like I just wish I was more left brain so I didn't have to see everything at once.
Yeah, well,
It's kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
I feel that too, because it's also, I don't feel like I'm good at articulating stuff, because that's what I can't, and that's the same thing. And I've maybe gotten better at that through time and talking to left brain people and having to be able to my desire to relate to people so much has forced me to be able to do it, but I'm not normally good at it. I say this all the time, forest and trees. I see the forest. I don't know how to explain the forest to you. I don't know how to condense it. Like, I just see the whole thing. I don't know how to, and I feel like most people really like conversations that are very tree focused, very detailed, all these things. And I think that's because they fundamentally, they think their thinking has been trained to see parts and out of parts construe wholes. And I just by nature don't do that. I'm the opposite.
That's why I'm here to translate you, Luke.
Yeah. No, you're much better at that. And that's why I told you before, like, there are times when you say this, I said this to Nate the other day, where Nate will say things that I feel like I've been saying for 2 years to people.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, Nate, that was so great. That was so
I know.
It's like, what the hell?
And I will be the first person to acknowledge that you've been saying them.
I'm
You
struggling with
have
envy,
it.
actually.
I just think that like I think maybe I'm like more I think maybe let's see. I'm more of a whole brain person. Maybe that's it. Like so I'm not right I'm neither either fully right brain dominant or fully left brain dominant. I'm able I'm able to use both sides in coordination well.
I
Whereas
think
maybe
it's just-
for
yeah.
that the articulation part is for someone who's truly right brain dominant, the articulation part might be more difficult. But because I'm more whole brained, then I'm able to both see the vision and then bring that vision into articulation. Does
Well,
that
you've
make
said this
sense?
before, even your debate training.
Yeah.
To be good at debate, that's what that is. It's all left brain stuff, and it's
It's
training that
entirely
Oh.
left brain.
training that faculty.
And
It's
it's
a
not
skill.
and it's non-communication.
Oh.
It's not talking. It's total
Yes.
nonsense.
Yeah.
It's total nonsense. It's a
So
game.
I'm just gonna toss this in here because I had to laugh the other day. So when you like when I interact with the world, I'm always seeing it as a subject, right? That I'm in relationship to it and it's making me. And
Yeah.
and that gives me kind of a an innate sense of humility. Like when I'm interacting with my animals, for example, I'm not overly dominant. I don't think I'm the master. I don't, I'm in relationship to
But
them.
that's how you're raising them up.
Right. And so anyway, yesterday I went up to the barnyard and all the animals are out. I like to keep my animals as free as possible. And so I've got 3 horses, I got a bunch of chickens and a goose and all my dogs, right? And I go up there and I'm walking towards the chicken coop by myself and I can hear this little in the background and I turn around and every animal in the barnyard is walking behind me. All the chickens, the goose, and 3 horses, and the dogs.
Shari, you're like the green lady in Perelandra.
Like Snow White.
Happened.
Yeah.
That's what happened to her. No, I'm not even so like that is a compliment, but it's also, I think, pointing to something true. That's what would happen if we were in right relation to things.
Yes.
If we were living in communion with everything. That's what the whole world being submitted to the church, who then submits it to the head, which is Christ, who then submits everything to God. That's it. That's what it does. And they do it voluntarily. They do it because you're not domineering. They do it because you're treating them as subjects.
Right.
But
The greater degree that love is being actually practiced
Yeah.
properly, the less authority is needed.
Within the hierarchy, this is Christianity. Within the hierarchy, the greater serves the lesser. That's it. Every time.
The interesting thing too is that none of the animals are being aggressive with each other. Like the goose isn't chasing the chickens, the horses aren't chasing off the dogs. They're all moving together behind me.
The lion lays down with the lamb.
Right. And it's because we have a respect. I don't even know how to put it. It's like I often think to I say to people, look, if you, because they say to me, you can talk to animals, and I say, well, no, I just listen, and when I listen, then they talk to me.
Perfect. You
Yeah.
can talk to animals. No, I listen to animals. That's perfect,
Yeah.
Shari.
Well,
I'm making myself sound crazy.
listening and listening is attending, right? So to bring it
There
back.
you go.
Masculine
Yeah.
versus
right.
feminine.
Yeah, it's attending. Okay, so hey, maybe we can go ahead and get
Second clip.
get a second clip in. All right, here we go. I'm actually going to skip over the second one because
Yeah, I
we've
feel like
actually
we
kind
talked
of
about
addressed.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, let's do the house example. Yeah.
That's what we're doing. Yep, that's where I'm headed, Shari.
Cool.
In the left hand. So, quality is replaced by quantity. Uniqueness is replaced by the category. And then again, the left hemisphere tends to see things as inanimate, where the right hemisphere will see them as animate.
Well, a
And
category implies in some sense that the members of that category are indistinguishable, right? Because otherwise you don't have a
Yes.
category, you just have particularity. And so you can
Exactly.
imagine that, I mean, to understand this completely, you have to understand to some degree what categories are for.
Sorry,
Or
can I interrupt?
yeah, what
Yeah, that was the ground rules.
Okay. So this will be not quite, I mean, it's not gonna be related to the total clip there, but when he said just to have a category, it means that the things within the category are indistinguishable. I would just quibble about the language. I would say things within a category means that there's something unifying them. It's not that they're indistinguishable.
Oh, he's saying when you're thinking about a category as category, right? So if I just say dog, and you're just thinking about the category dog, you might come up with like multiple different examples, but the category itself is just,
it's like
it has no particularity. Dog can be used to refer to any of the particular members of that category. That's
okay. Well, I'm talking about something other than he's talking about. That's
Okay.
good. Thank you for the
Okay.
illustration.
Yeah, no problem. Let's pick it back up.
what categories are for, at least in part, you put things that you can act towards the same way in the same category. And so
yes.
young children might think of cats and dogs as dogs, all of them as dogs, because they're cuddly, pettable entities. Not because they have 4 legs or because they have fur, but because you interact with them the same way. Then you can differentiate cats and dogs as you get a little older. But the first category, dog, which is pettable things, is a perfectly reasonable category. And you can imagine that once a categorical structure has been imposed, that it's easy just to see the category. I wrote an essay in my new book, which is called Beyond Order, about the function of artists. And I believe that part of what artists do, and I think this is maybe, you can tell me, but I think it might reflect the differences that you're talking about. When I was a kid, I lived in a small town, and I can remember all the houses on my block. I can remember them in detail. They're familiar to me as individual entities. But now that I'm an adult, I've lived on this street for like 20 years, but the houses are indistinguishable to me. I can't see them as different entities. And I think it's because I'm so familiar with the category house, which is a practical category, that I can't see beyond the category. And it's very...
Okay, let me stop it there. Because I know Shari wanted to talk about the house. The house
analogy?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I thought of when he was talking about that was that, well, there's the whole idea of childlikeness in here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when he actually says, when I was a child and I saw houses, they were all different. Mm-hmm. And now as an adult, I see houses and they're all the same. And I thought, when you're a child and you see a house, it's not just a house. The more important thing is the family that lives in that house, right? And that house is defined by the spirit of that family in the house. And everything about the house reflects the family that lives in it. And so as a child, you're making that interconnected connection to the house.
Well, he actually, what's funny is that he doesn't talk about it here, but he actually uses the same house example in his new book. Oh, and when he talks about it in his book, he as far as I'm concerned, he nails the reason why, and it's related to this idea of attention again. Like the reason, like he can remember like the specific details about the houses of his childhood, and that he can remember all that specific particularity so much more, is that he was attending it because he was wandering around his neighborhood and exploring and discovering. And now as an adult, like house has just become this like flat category that he doesn't attend to anymore.
Yeah, but
so I don't loses its particularity.
I think that's a very propositional, like I think Peterson's having a problem here. Right? He's not getting it because it reminds me of, again, that 4 Stages of Life by Douglas Harding,
Yeah.
where when he talks about the toddler looks in the mirror, the parent says, look, that's you, and the toddler goes, okay, and then runs around outside,
Right.
and he is completely absorbed into
Fully open to the world.
being.
Yeah.
He's not fully open to it. He's a part of it.
Right.
He's completely integrated into it. And that's why when Peterson as a child looks at those houses, he can see the differences because he's a part of the world. When he becomes an adult, he now is, he separates himself.
It's a relational interaction.
Yeah, it's not just attention. It's actually a way of being in the world. And I think children are more.
I think attention is
more apt.
I think that attention is connected to relation, though, because if you think about the way we were talking about it before, and this attention is a very fuzzy word, like, which they actually talk about in this conversation. But if you think about the way like after we were talking about the earlier clip, if you look at the way that we were talking about attention, and we related love to being like a very high quality mode of attention, right? That's fully relational. I would say that when you are attending something, you are relating to it. But again, as I said before, there are different modes, right? So the thing is, are you attending it? Are you attending to things in an objective mode? And I would say that Peterson, the adult, when everything is just a house, he's attending to it in the objective mode. He's taken all the life out of the houses.
Yeah, but the question though is why? Why?
Because of the whole problem the modern world suffers.
Right.
Right, because this is what we've turned the world into. But it's which goes to show you that it's, by the way, the fact that we all experience the world differently as a child shows you that these dualisms are not they're not default. They are in fact culturally imparted.
Well, it's also that idea though of relevance that Peterson talks about, right? If everything is relevant to you, you can't get anything done. Like you
Right.
do have to bring things down.
But why do we think we need to do things? What's that about? I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
He does make the distinction between quality and quantity. So the right brain's concerned with quality, the left brain's concerned with quantity, which is interesting. Like if you start accumulating things for no reason and you don't know why,
right,
and you're still not satisfied, like you may have,
right,
you may be unbalanced where you need to, that's the whole. Who was that lady who was? You go and simplify and you ask if this thing brings you joy or whatever. And then, that whole thing was all about quality and quantity. It's like, let's move everything down. Let's consider everything and we'll consider it by quality.
That was awesome. Cause that's sacramental worldview making right there. That whole book was,
it was so popular because people are like, I have tons of stuff and I don't know what any of it means.
Let me ask you
dead objects.
Let me ask you a seemingly random.
The only thing you're asked to consider what it means is like the new stuff that you're going to buy.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that means something. Then you buy it and all of a sudden now it loses all its meaning.
So let me ask you a seemingly random question that isn't very random at all.
Okay.
Why do we go camping?
I know why I go camping.
Why do you go camping? Talk about why you go camping.
I don't know. Like, well, cause there's several things about it. Like,
okay,
you want to, the quality of the time is different.
Yes.
So when you're out there, especially if it's just a short time, every day like lasts a week, and everything you do, like you're thinking about, I guess if you go camping all the time or you live this lifestyle, it's just what you do. But because it's something different, like I have to think about lighting my little stove and the food that I'm cooking, and like everything's like thought through and everything has a meaning, and there's a time for everything in the day. And this point in the day, we're going to hike and then we got to eat. So we got to prepare, and like all this stuff has to happen. That's one aspect of it.
I have some things to add.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is where you're going, Nate, but I think what you said, Jess, is the quality of time is different. And I think there are reasons for that, because there's a few. So here's a few of my trees to try to paint my mosaic. Here are the trees coming at you.
Oh,
Wim Hof. People know who Wim Hof is.
Yeah.
He's the Iceman. He's this guy who climbs mountains without clothes on in like 0-degree temperatures and takes ice baths and advocates for cold showers, and says part of what's wrong with the modern body is that we have lost our connection to the natural world and we've become disconnected. We are no longer connected to the natural world, and so it's made us cold and callous, and that's why our health and all these things are affected by it. And then the other thing is that hideous strength, the end of that hideous strength. And then also the idea that like we live in now, because of technology in this modern world, we live in these houses that are increasingly, like even now with COVID, that are increasingly separate from the outside world. You know, like we get rid of spiders, we don't want dirt, we don't want vacuum, we want it clean, we want it sanitized, wipe the counter, and part of that's all okay, but like we can't hear nature. We're inside, we're not outside. It's this thing that is buttressed and put away from the outside. But then you can take that all the way on like a spectrum, where you go all the way to that hideous strength, where you want to create a world with artificial trees and artificial dirt, because then natural world is gross, it's dirty, it's bad. We want clean rooms. And we've gotten that way with our food. It's the whole hygiene hypothesis. Like kill all germs, kill everything, kill all bacteria, and we'll be healthier. Are we healthier? My wife was just telling me they're seeing more and more in the medical world anaphylaxis. So like allergic reactions where people can't breathe, it's happening younger and younger and younger to kids. This is all a product of a divorce. It makes me think of Frankenstein.
Right, because of all of our doing just creates a world of artifice. Like there's no like, and then think about the things that you're doing when you're camping, as compared to the things that, like, if you have, let's say you have a standard like white collar corporate job. I happen to work for state government, so I mean my job is I'm not working for private enterprise, but it's has a lot of very similar aspects to it, right? Where it's just like most of what I do is complete nonsense. It just is. It has no. It is doing for the sake of doing that is completely robbed of meaning. Whereas the things you're doing things. So I was kind of joking when I said, why are you doing? But I was talking about that. But I was wanting to get toward this particular mode of doing, which is doing for the sake of doing. Whereas when you go camping, you're doing things that have actual meaning. Then you're doing them for a real reason.
You're doing it for the love of it versus a transaction. You're not.
Well, also some of it is necessary. I mean, you gotta light up the can stove because you gotta feed your family and people still have to eat. And so, I mean, but
it's making roast for the world.
But it's still, but that's meaningful though, right? Like there's clear meaning in that. It's like, oh, I'm going to prepare. I'm going to prepare food over this camp stove or this. I'm a live fire cooking guy, so it would probably be directly over a fire. But the point is that there's actual meaning to everything that you do, and like, and then you think about like I'm glad the whole quality versus quantity thing, and it's like if you like. What is all of this about? Like there's just like our actions, our day-to-day actions themselves are robbed of meaning. No wonder we're in a meaning crisis. Like most of us, the things that we do I mean, like 40 hours a week is the standard workday. So for most of us are spending 40 hours a week doing something that has no actual meaning.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story I heard. There were, how there's organizations that'll dig wells in Africa for villages that don't have clean water. But there was, I don't know how often this happens, but this one story is that one village, like they had to walk like 2 miles to go get water every day to get clean water. And so they're like, all right, we'll come in, we'll build a well for these people. It'll help free up time and all this stuff. So they dig the well, and they said within a few months that the villagers had destroyed it and filled it in, because part of life was walking to go get water. And when they dug the well, they took that part of life away from them. And they decided, they're like, we want that part of life. We want the walk to go get water. We want the talking that happens along the way, because none of that, all that was disposed of when they dug the well.
What you just said, that's like the perfect illustration of technological babble. That's what it does. And progress. That's the myth of progress, and like getting everyone more and more wealth. Why? Because you want them all to be on opiates, depressed and suicidal and taking Ambien? Like, that's what we want the world to be? We want to give everyone like our technological progress, but that is what that demonic idol promises you, is health and wellness and easy water. Won't that be so much better? And they're like, destroy that bastard.
There's a demon in the well.
Right.
Yeah, there's a point later in the conversation. I'm wondering if I shouldn't skip ahead to that clip where well, we can just talk about it anyway, and maybe we'll just skip over it later. MacGilchrist like asked the question, like, what is poverty, right? Because Peterson is talking about like this sort of like this neoliberal, solution of like gradual material progress, and how he agrees that people find this to be a hollow story. Well, there's a reason why people find it to be a hollow story. It really doesn't have any meaning.
Well,
And the question, what is poverty, that MacGilchrist asks, is a very important question to ask. Is poverty to be conceived of only in material terms? And if so, like, how disconnected from your own humanity is that?
So when you were talking about camping, I was thinking, there's that, do you work to live or do you live to work? Right?
Right.
Idea. And
Right.
And so, like Jesus said, man cannot live from bread alone. I mean, you have to work to make bread, right? So it's not wrong to make bread and eat bread and do that, but that's not the thing that will actually sustain you, right? And so, and MacGilchrist uses that in reference to his own question, what is poverty? And I actually think that poverty is a lack of wisdom. That's what I think it is. That's what poverty is. Because you can't navigate even the bread without it, right? You don't know how to make bread, and you don't know that you need more than bread to live. You don't know any of those things without wisdom.
Right. And I would say in as much as you have wisdom, the less material things like bread are needed to nourish you.
Sure.
That's part of wisdom. Part of wisdom is to not be reliant on that materiality in terms of evaluating your own wealth or poverty.
Right. And
like,
I mean, this is Vervaeke's whole project, right? Is to help people attain wisdom. I mean, I sat in once in just a group chat on the Vervaeke server, and they were talking about, getting wisdom and all the things they were going to do to, make that happen for them. And I listened for the longest time. And then I asked them all, what is it for?
Right. Well, I'll give you a real world example of this, like thinking about poverty through a different lens, right? Like when I was younger and was like still working as a line cook and like struggling financially, I would go to my wife's parents were like very well off. They had like their home is like, over $1 million valuation home, like very large property, like 30-foot ceilings in the entryway, like house, and we would go there to eat, and it's like the food was an insult to food. Right. Right. And at home, like, even though I was working as a cook, I would still come home and feed my family and cook for my family, and we would always say to each other, we may be poor, but we eat like kings.
Mhm.
Right. Because that was food that was cooked with attention, with
Right.
attention to quality.
with
Right. And what
love.
you're
So,
hinting,
and
what you're-
I couldn't afford to spend a lot on the ingredients, but I had the skill to be able to take what I had and make it both nourishing and delicious.
Yeah.
Jess,
Whereas
this is
my
your
in-laws, who
McDonald's.
were, quite wealthy, were eating from what I would consider a very impoverished way, even though from a
Right.
resource standpoint, they could have afforded to eat better than I did, and yet they didn't.
Yeah. So what you're actually pointing at, though, Nate, is relationship,
Right.
right? because so back to this conversation I had on the Verbaki server, I asked them, I said, so what are you going to do with all this wisdom? How is it, why are you going to acquire it? And they could only make it about themselves. So they would make better decisions. They wouldn't make mistakes. They could get the job that they always wanted, right? It was this kind of this tool to fulfill themselves, right? And I said to them, but that's not what wisdom is for. Wisdom is to be shared.
Right.
That's
That's
what
not
wisdom
actually
is.
That's not actually wisdom. That's anti-wisdom. That's antichrist.
And it's obvious. It's obvious they've never spent any time like asking themselves why.
Okay.
like, because, like, seriously, like, you could put them like you could put them in a room with a 3-year-old and they would automatically discover like how hollow that is, because the 3-year-old would every time they would say, well, I want to do this because I want to do this because I want to do this, they would ask them why. And if you follow those whys all the way down, you'll see how empty that is. Like how impoverished it is.
Hey, Nate, sorry to interrupt, but Michael would like to join the chat.
Oh,
And
that's
can you
wonderful.
send him-
Let me go ahead
can
and
you send him
pause.
the link?
No, I don't want him to.
Okay, so we're back live now. Luke had to step out, and Michael will be joining us at some point in the near future. In the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and play our next clip, and then we'll comment. And if you have something to say in the middle of it, go ahead and interrupt, and I'll pause it. Oh, come on. It's not cooperating with me. That's weird. There we go. There it goes.
Well, it's all part of the world picture, which, from the philosophical point of view, is the purpose of the long book, which I sent to you in manuscript, The Matter with Things. Effectively, I can state quite simply that I want to give a considered response to the philosophy of our age, which is that there is only matter and that things are understood by reducing them to their parts, and this doesn't change them. It's a very naive philosophy. It's simplistic and it's immoral because it changes the way we treat the world and other people and nature. It changes our idea of who we are in a very damaging way, ruling out things that other traditions have traditionally held as very powerful. And, coming back to your comment about how people cling on to things that they believe, and it's much more difficult to try and see something in a different way, especially with age. This is why, of course, most traditions of spiritual growth enjoin on the person paradoxes, to see things in a completely new way that violates all the ways that they thought they knew. So I use paradox in this new book, but not in some blind way. In fact, I show that what we mean by a paradox is that the view of the left hemisphere of something and the view taken of the right hemisphere of the same thing can never actually completely marry up. They have different qualities, and if you push the comparison or the desire to make them logically come together too far, you end up with a paradox. And this started happening, early on in the Greek, the ancient Greek period of philosophy with Zeno. This is where the first paradoxes come from. And I have a whole chapter on paradox, which I see as generated by the desire of the left hemisphere to say it must be this or it must be that, clinging on preferentially to the very fragmentary view of the left hemisphere. See, the left hemisphere is not good at understanding. That sounds a very blanket statement, and it is. But the whole of the first part of that book, the new book, is massively more thorough neuropsychology than is in The Master and His Emissary. So it's about as thorough as I could possibly make it. And what I do is I look at the ways in which we have any chance of getting an idea of what the world is. What are the portals of entry of, if you like, information about the world to us? And I take it that it depends very much on our attention, how we dispose our attention, perception, the judgments we form on the basis of perception, the ways in which we apprehend what we're dealing with rather than comprehend it. In other words, grasp it, as we say, with the right hand of the left hemisphere, take it, use it. How we understand it in terms of emotional intelligence, which is not a small thing. It's the whole way in which we understand everything human. By emotional, I don't mean sort of in some, you know what I mean. I'm talking about social and emotional understanding, the sort of thing that is absent in people with autism. And cognitive intelligence, this may surprise people, but that all these things, and creativity. So creativity, intelligence of the cognitive kind, IQ kind, emotional and social intelligence, apprehension is a separate case. I'll come to that in a second. Perception, attention, and judgment. All these are better performed by the right hemisphere. Only apprehension is better performed by the left hemisphere. So the only thing the left hemisphere is better at is getting a hold on either an idea, very precise, clear one, or on a thing that it wants to use. But all the manifold complexity which our intelligence brings to bear in order to understand the world, all of that is better done by the right hemisphere. And I can say that on the basis not just of experiments in normal subjects, but on seeing what happens when you have either left hemisphere damage or right hemisphere damage. To summarize a vast chunk of information, which I hope will be there for people to read very, very soon. To summarize that very briefly, what one would say is that when you have damage to the right hemisphere, your grasp of reality is the main thing that's impaired. You don't understand it, you don't connect with it. Your ability to understand what's going on disappears. Whereas when you have a right hemisphere, that's when you have a right hemisphere stroke. When you have a left hemisphere stroke, the main things are you have difficulty speaking and using your right hand. They're practically very important, but essentially the understanding of the world, the grasp of the meaning of the world, so I have to use these words grasp occasionally, but the overall comprehension of the world is sustained by the right hemisphere.
Okay, now, so let me ask you a question.
Can I?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, okay.
And then yeah.
All right, okay. Let me just make this point.
Yep.
Because I want to, people might say, well, okay, but so what? We've both got right and left hemispheres, so we're not missing anything. So does it matter? Well, yes, it matters very importantly for my philosophical project. Because as I show in the second part of the book, where I look at the proper contributions to understanding made by reason, science, intuition, and imagination, what I can show is that in those attempts to grasp, we can see the world we can see the signature of the right hemisphere or the signature of the left hemisphere on a particular model. So if we have two possible models of a certain action or an aspect of reality or of space or time, which I deal with in the third part of the book, and indeed in philosophical history and in the history of physics and so on, there have tended to be opposing views of the world. Once you know how the left hemisphere sees it and how the right hemisphere tends to see things, you can see the hallmark of the left hemisphere's understanding on a certain philosophical standpoint, on a certain scientific take of the world. And you can see the hallmark and the imprint of the right hemisphere in certain other ways of reasoning and of science and philosophy. So this is very important, because up till now, we've never been able to judge between these two. We've got A, we've got B, we just have to go, can't tell, we can't reconcile them, we can't do without either of them. That's true. Ultimately, that's true, but we can get a very sharp idea, I believe now, of which of these is fallacious, which one is going to lead us down a blind alley, which one is out of touch with reality, and which one is more in touch with reality. I just wanted to say that because it's behind the whole philosophical drift of my book, which is, how do we know who we are? I asked Plotinus's question, who are we? That's effectively the question. What is the cosmos? What is nature? And how do we all relate? Sorry, hand over to you.
No.
All right. Thoughts on that?
That's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I've always thought that a paradox is holy. That was the only way that I could describe it. And when I heard this,
can you elaborate on what you mean by holy? I really like that. I like that. But I if you could just, and keep talking about what you're talking about, but if you could also elaborate what you mean by holy while you're talking about the idea, that would help me.
oh, see that I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I don't know what I mean by holy. Holy to me is something that is what is holy? I would prefer to ask you what holy is, and then I'll just agree or disagree.
Well, what
occurs?
occurred? Okay,
like set apart, right?
To me, yes, I'm thinking set apart,
Something's-
but not necessarily in that God is holy. So, like when you read about the elders, is it the 24 or the 4 or the 12? I can't remember which number it is, but in Revelation, when they fall down and they say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God," right? Like there is nothing apart. There's nothing else.
Mhm.
You know, it's just like reality is God, and that is holy. And to me, a paradox.
reality is God and that is holy. Staying with that. So here's what I was wondering when I asked the question.
Sure.
I'm wondering if there's more than just like a phonetic semblance between the idea of holy and the idea of whole.
Oh,
Is that what our concept about the holy is trying to point at?
well,
Is that
intuit
that the whole in that sort of absolute sense? That's what I was kind of
that's interesting that you would say
hinting at.
Yeah, because that's actually what I think, but I never said it because it's not the same word. So I thought I was wrong.
Right, it's not the same word, but if you think about, but okay.
But phonetically, yeah.
Phonetically, they sound. I mean, they do sound similar. Whole and holy. They don't. I don't know if they have. I don't think they have an etymological connection. But when we think about when we push both concepts, I think like
You get to the same place.
philosophically to what we're referencing, I think they are connected.
Of course.
So
yeah.
and that so that it is end up being more than a merely phonetic resemblance.
Yes. No, you do. You end up at the same place because it's the one, right?
So now go ahead and pick up with what you were saying if you still remember.
Yeah. So to me, a paradox. So from a materialist, let's just say from MacGilchrist's point of view, a paradox is kind of like the child of the marriage of the right and left hemisphere, Okay.
Mhm.
It emerges when those two come into perfect communion with each other. That seems to me what a paradox is. And it is utterly ungraspable, right? The right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, like the left hemisphere wants to grasp and apprehend, and the right hemisphere is comprehending, right? So there's too much information for the left hemisphere to process. And so they come up against each other in this paradox. Well, they come up against each other, and the paradox is then born out of this trying to apprehend and comprehend at the same time.
Right. And isn't it, well, paradox, like one of the ways of thinking about paradox is paradox is a way of describing like the unity between two poles. Like that's what's really going on in a paradox, right?
Well, like a really good paradox is like Douglas Harding saying that at the center there's nothing.
Right. Yes. Right. Right. Exactly. So they seem to
paradox.
they seem to be opposites, right? So
Right.
they appear to be opposites, but in the paradox, it turns out that those two things that seem to be polar opposites are actually a unity.
Right.
And the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo actually points you directly in that. That's what it points at, right?
Mhm.
Like it is like from nothing that the universe is born.
Right.
In Peterson's talk with Stephen Fry talks about being an empiricist rather than a rationalist. And it
Yeah.
seems to me like a paradox is something that's empirically true, but not rationally conceived.
Right, right. And empirically true if you're working with the whole brain. The problem, this is exactly the problem I had with like Stephen Fry. It's like, okay, be an empiricist. I have no problem with that. But why are you arbitrary? Why is the reason driving? Why is the left brain in control of your empiricism? Why not take in the full data set that your entire brain is bringing in? Why do you deny blackbirds a sense of wonder? I told you I'd bring I told you I'd get to that. Like seriously, it's like what? How do you empirically know that a blackbird has experience of wonder? What access do you have empirically to the internal workings of the blackbird? The only access you have is access through your own, and the logical assumption actually is to assume that it also has a view in as well as a view out, and
Right.
it very well might have a sense of wonder.
So, but if Fry did that, he would end up with a paradox, right? Like he would, if he was to take that and marry it, right, to this comprehensive view of the world, then he would end up with this child called the paradox, right? And that's why to me it's holy, because and whole, because it's the two, like from a purely scientific point of view, it's the two hemispheres actually working in tandem with each other the way that they should be. And like
and the oldest philosophical paradox is the paradox of unity and multiplicity, which is what the mystery or paradox of the Trinity is there to resolve.
Yeah, but Jesus talks about paradoxes all the time. The first shall be last, right?
What was that?
Like Jesus is speaking. Jesus likes to throw paradoxes in all the time.
Right.
The first shall be last.
Because that's like spiritual wisdom has always been communicated through paradox. Like,
right.
Which is what MacGilchrist is referencing. And there's a reason for that. Like, because that's how you get the vision of the whole.
Yes.
Right. That's the biggest map that you need to do everything within.
Right. But so it's also an indicator, don't you think, though, it's also an indicator that the right hemisphere, because the right hemisphere is comfortable with ambiguity, right?
Yes.
And the left is not. And so if you can handle paradox, then I would think that it's a good indicator that your right hemisphere is the master in this case.
Right.
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 And to have spiritual wisdom, we need to be able to sit with paradox. We just do.
Right.
And like, or mystery. Mystery is another way of talking about, like, mystery is like maybe a more specifically Christian way of talking about the same idea.
Well, mystery to me is something that you can actually grasp, but it's just so layered and so deep that you never actually get to the bottom of it. Whereas a paradox, to me, so the reason, like, what I find interesting about paradox is that it's ungraspable, right? It's ineffable. You can't hold on to it. You can't describe it. It's not rational. You can't use your reason or your logic to come to any terms with it. So in a sense, it's like God. It's
Yes.
in essence.
Right. So this is why,
ineffable.
right. So it is, yes. So our religious sensibilities always have to be connected to the right brain, I would say, because they are transrational by their nature.
Mm.
So if you are going to try to rely exclusively on your left brain to understand religious truths, it will invariably lead you astray because you won't be able to see it.
Well, you'll be exegeting everything,
Right.
right?
Right. Which
Which is vivisection.
you said it, not me.
I did.
What is that? What is that? Yes, you're right. And what is the subject of the vivisection of that kind of theology?
The body.
It's God.
Yeah.
It's God. That is what kills God.
Mm-hmm.
This is why that's really what it's that God. It's that God that Nietzsche is declaring dead.
Right.
And that God is dead.
Yeah.
Because it never was alive. Because it comes from a kind of thinking that renders the world a world of dead objects, and every object that it subjects to its analysis,
Well, it's like
that it puts on its examination table, has to be dead, including God.
Right. Like that Max Mueller quote from MacGilchrist earlier. He says, "None of the things that words represent actually exist." Right.
Right.
There's who was, man, I forget his name. It wasn't Nate. Nick. Remember Nick on the Discord?
Yeah.
He talked about how in his experience with his cults, like part of a cult was being able to have elegant resolutions to paradoxes, or at least hold paradoxes at its core. And he talked about how good religions do that too, which is you ultimately get to some sort of paradox at the core. And I wonder, because even like when we poke fun at Calvinism and predestination, let's say, and then double predestination, we're like, this is a paradox, it doesn't work. And the Calvinists will maintain it. They'll just be like, yeah, that's the paradox at the core of Calvinism. But what is the paradox serving, I guess, is a better question. So like the paradox at the core of universalism, let's say, they like to point out, like, if universalism is true, then how does God judge? And the universalist says he still judges. He's still a judge. He still does all these things, but it's just in the end, love wins, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And the universalist has this paradox at the core. I wonder if but
I'm not sure if those are paradoxes. Are those paradoxes? Like, I'm genuinely asking the question.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm
like, because to me it's a.
Well, I would say that the Calvinism is rejecting paradox, because the paradox is free will and determinism. Feels like to me. Right? Yeah. It's decided a paradox between free will and determinism in favor of determinism. Mm. You have more experience with Calvin. I don't want to straw man Calvinist theology. You have more. Well, would you say that's a fair characterization? Certainly, it's certainly a fair characterization of the popular understanding of Calvinist theology. Mm-hmm. Is that it sides it ultimately decides to resolve that free will and determinist paradox, but in favor of determinism. Yeah. I would say that. But
it runs into the next paradox, which is like, how can which is trying to hold a deterministic God with a loving God.
You know, I was thinking about this whole
Sure.
thing, this whole, so like the fact that, you know, Max Mueller says none of the things words represent actually exist. So the fact that you represent something stops the presence of the thing, right? Which is what Barfield talks about when he's equating this with idolatry. So suddenly, if you think you know God, like if you think you know what God is up to, then suddenly he becomes an idol, right? Because you stop at it.
The God you know, the God that you think that you know, in that grasping
Right.
kind of way that the
When
left
to possess it.
that you think you can apprehend, and that is by definition an idol.
Right.
Now you can know God, but you have to know God relationally. That's the only
Right.
possible way to know God.
Right. And relationally, even within our own human interactions with each other, we don't know each other. Right? Like even with our most intimate partner, we have to admit that we don't actually know them. Like
And the
there's
question,
some mystery.
to bring this back to the whole Calvinist issue, is like, I don't understand. Please explain to me how anyone can relate to the Calvinist God.
Well, I'm not
Can anyone make a case for it? Like, I'm open to like some. I mean, I'm open to the possibility, but I don't.
Well, there are ways to work it. You know, I mean, you know, there's obviously ways to work it because people claim that they know God and that they, you know, but they always.
Yeah, because well, that's MacGilchrist will say later on in this conversation that ultimately that the theology doesn't matter. What matters is the way it ultimately has no impact on how. What matters is how we relate to God. And I would say the how we relate to God is important here too.
Of course.
Because we
Yeah,
need to relate to God as a subject and not as an object. And that rationalist theology is only going to lead to relating to God as an object. That's the nature of it. So if you're relating to God as an object, what is that? It's an idol.
Well, it's because, you know, George MacDonald talks about separating God into offices, right? As magistrate and father, for example. He uses those two examples.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you think about that, then God becomes an officer. Like he's you know, if you don't see, I don't know how to say this properly. If you don't realize that both of those positions are the same thing, which is paradoxical, right?
Right.
Like that's justice and mercy. How does God show justice and mercy? And this was kind of the conversation yesterday.
But the reason that God can be those different things, those different like modes, is because God is first and foremost a person, and person, and the entire idea of person is a relational being.
Right. I mean, the best example I can think of for justice and mercy is when, in the story of Lilith, Adam cuts off her hand and she goes to sleep, and it begins to heal immediately, right? So there's a sense of you can't go to sleep with that thing, with your hand clenched closed, holding on, possessing that last particle, right? That Harding talks about. You can't do that. That's not right.
Right.
So I'm going to cut it off and you're going to sleep and I'm going to heal it. Right. And this is how justice and mercy are the same thing. It's the same operation. It's not two distinct things. Right.
Well, I would say that I would say that like, okay, so if we take Jesus very seriously when he says that if you see me, you've seen the Father, right? And we look at if we look at the life and ministry and death and resurrection of Jesus, and if we're looking at those things and we're truly looking at that as our image of the Father, then it shows us that our ideas about things like power and glory and justice are all inverted. It turns out that love is the ultimate power, It is
Mhm.
literally the force that creates a universe out of nothing. So power is love, and any notion of power that is not love is not God's power. That's
And it's
your
Right.
power. That's your grasping, grabbing, seizing, controlling power.
mm,
And obviously, if you look at what happens to Jesus, like he's not he actually talks about going to the cross as coming into his glory. Now, what human being would see that as glory?
mm.
He's inverting our understanding of all of these things. This is where I think Calvinist theology like goes astray, is it's like it assumes that our human versions of these things, of sovereignty, of power, of glory, of justice, actually are related to those things from the divine
Well, it
perspective.
actually
And I
assumes,
would say that Christ shows us that in reality, that from the divine versions of those things are completely inverted from our own understanding.
right, like I would even go so far as to say the whole idea of the glory of God in this worldview assumes that the object of his love is himself and not the person, not humanity, not creation. Okay?
Mhm.
That is
Right. And this is exactly what you would expect with something that has gone too far from the mode of the left brain, is you would expect it to just create a God that is nothing but an egoic projection, which is exactly what it is. Which is
right.
why which is and it's so ironic. The ironic part about it is that it blinds itself to that's what it's doing, because it sees itself in because it claims depravity. It's like, oh well, because of depravity, that really can't be what we're doing.
Hmm.
Actually, I'd like to ask Luke, because I don't know if you heard that or not, Luke, but I just said that in the Calvinist worldview,
Uh-oh.
that,
Oh, Luke's back.
that God, it's assumed that the object of God's love is himself, like that he's glorifying himself and not the object of his love being me or you or creation or whatever, but that it's
Well,
actually,
yeah, no.
yeah,
This is exactly what I was trying to talk about with Cal and Michael, because in a Calvinist metaphysics, I don't know what their ontology of a human being is.
right.
What
Right.
is a human being? That's
right.
why my question was,
Well,
what is man?
it's
Because what you're saying is true. They will say God loves, because it's all of this. Like you have this total frame. It's a package. You have total depravity, which means like all of your good works are like as filthy rags. You can't, even your good works are bad and
Mhm.
repudiated by God. Anything that you would do is bad. The only thing that is good is the meritorious, righteous acts, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the only reason God, so this is where like the only reason God loves you is because of Jesus, but they don't have a mystical metaphysic of like panentheism that is like, or like of Karl Barth, for example, or something where it's me in Christ, like I actually exist, I am something. This is where I can't make sense of a Calvinist metaphysic. I don't know what I am or
Well,
what you are.
There's no personhood.
well, I think
There is no person.
I think theologically that it can't even happen unless your idea of a person is just an atomized individual. I think there's a reason why individualism and Calvinist theology like grow up together historically.
Oh, that's a good
But I
point.
don't
So
even know what that
I think
I mean,
I think what I'm saying is it has a completely non-relational view of a person. It's the cogito ergo sum idea of a person, which is why its theology is nothing but an egoic projection.
I mean, I get that too, but even then, like, I think this is where if you push it though, you could say, yeah, it's individualized, but I'm just like, how do they even exist then? Like, this is why I think fundamentally nobody acts that way. It is egoic intellect because it's not real.
There's nothing real about it, because even you as an individual, you can't make sense of the being of the individual apart from a communal aspect. This is why relational
Right.
ontology is
Right.
fundamental
Well,
to
this is
anything
also
that is.
right, and this is why also, like, David
Which
Bentley
make-
makes the point in That All Shall Be Saved, that if your loved ones go to hell, let's say, in this theology, you can actually look down on them and not feel anything.
Right.
And he makes the point that if your personhood is intact, then you will.
You're in
feel-
hell with them.
Well,
If you're a
yeah,
person,
exactly.
if you're an actual person, if you're
Yeah.
the kind of relational being you're actually called into becoming, you will be in hell with them.
Right. So if you can eliminate personhood from the get-go, then hell remains a possibility.
That's right. No, yeah, it entirely
True.
rests. I'm not. It entirely, as far as I can see, its theology rests entirely on this notion of the person as an atomized individual. If you have a proper relational understanding of person, you can't construct that theology, because you would immediately begin to see how it doesn't work at all, because you immediately start to see the connections between all things.
Well, and ultimately too, it's monistic and it's pantheistic, except for within some weird Trinitarian thing, because there isn't unity and multiplicity, because eventually
It's
only
God playing a
loves
meaningless
Christ.
game. It's God playing a meaningless game with himself. As far as I can see,
Yes.
there's no difference between Calvinism and nihilism, if taken seriously.
Well, that's what you just said previously about Nietzsche, right? Saying that God is dead.
Yes.
When you kill God, then you end up in nihilism, right? And like I said, and I'll say it again, it's a vivisection.
Or if you're worshiping an idol that's nothing but a projection of your own egoic intellect, you are also, it's indistinguishable from nihilism, because the thing that you're worshiping is not real. It has no actual being.
And it always boils down to idolatry, actually. Like that. This is
Yes.
why Barfield in Saving the Appearances calls it a study in idolatry, because
Correct.
Yeah.
as soon as you stop short, as soon as you lose that ambiguity, right, that you gain from paradox, as soon as your left and right hemispheres stop working in tandem together properly, then you have reached that point of idolatry. Like you're,
Yep.
you know, I
Right. You have to be able to rest with the fact that not knowing is the purest form of knowing.
well,
that is this is the fundamental problem of the West, not for every group, for
That's right.
every group in the West.
No, actually, but what we've done is we've been so successful, we've been culturally so successful that we've exported our mind virus to most of the world.
Yes. Yeah. Which is the point that I made in my first conversation with Paul Vanderklay about egoic intellect, and then he challenged me and we went off the rails.
well, this is why I think in the, you know, in many like I don't know about the Catholic faith very much, but I'm assuming, and also in Orthodoxy, that the stress is placed on the fact that God's essence cannot be known. Like there's just, you know, no way that you can know that, because if you know, like I wrote down here, when I think I know what I'm worshiping, it becomes an idol.
Yeah,
Right?
it's the apophatic, the unknowing. The right brain is always ultimate in Eastern theology. It always has been.
Yeah.
You can't think you know, because once you do, then you.
And I would say the same thing is true in the theology of the West prior to roughly 1300 too. Like I think like this is why, like, you know, Peugeot is always talking about like the medieval model. Like the medieval age was not like our age. It was a participatory age. Like we had not yet entered into this complete withdrawal or participation that is characteristic of, you know, this early modern, that really begins in like the early modern period and happens. It comes up along with these kinds of like extreme Protestant theologies that we're talking about. I'm not saying that those theologies caused it, because actually that would be totally unfair, because the roots of those theologies are actually found in Catholic theology in the early 14th century.
You should
So-
actually, well, I'm going to recommend to our viewers that they watch the episode Luther from Fakey. That'll give you a really good breakdown of how God became so distant and removed, right? Which is what Barfield talks about. You know, this is this period of withdrawal, right? It's not God withdrawing from us, it's us withdrawing from God, right? God is always, he's everywhere present, filling all things, right?
Yeah. Where will I go to escape from your presence, O Lord? Yeah, I
Right.
mean, that psalm is one of my favorites. I have a question and a proposal. Can I insert this?
Yeah.
So I wondered how everybody started talking about Calvinism. We always get on a Calvinist rant. But then also I want to have I talked about Calvinism with Mary Cohan a long time ago, and it's come up a few times. I would love to have a conversation with you guys if you want to, but I want to talk to a Calvinist, but like a currently affirming Calvinist. Most of my adult Christian life, I actually was a Calvinist. So I think I understand the theology really well, but I think it's just too easy. Like we can sit here and dunk on Calvinism all day, high five.
Well, we're talking about, but to be fair here, we're not talking about Reformed Christianity, period. We're talking about a particularly rigid traditional Calvinism that is like a sub branch within the broader Reformed tradition. I don't think, like for example, like I was listening to a Martin Beeler talk on the Trinity, who's part of a Swiss Reformed church tradition, who is broadly educated within the medieval Catholic tradition and has contributed to Catholic academic journals. Like his theology would not look anything like what we're caricaturing here. So there's a lot of like the Reformed tradition is pretty diverse. So there's a particular kind of rigid, like strict Calvinism that we're talking about, just to be fair, because I don't want to, and even people hold that, and again, like MacGilchrist says, it's like ultimately your theology does not matter. It's your relation to God that matters. So, and there are a lot of people who may hold these theological ideas who are still finding their way to live into the kind of radical relationality.
Yeah.
That we're
so like, are you
anyway.
An act as if Calvinist, or are you like Paul Vanderklay, who is not an act as if Calvinist? So, but here's my proposal. I want to talk to a Calvinist, and then we could also bring in Sam, because Sam is good in these conversations. He's really good at steel manning everyone's positions. Because I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. We talk about this often. It's not only that I think my main concern with Calvinism isn't that it's just like logically inconsistent and can't make sense of its metaphysics and ontology. That's a concern. My concern is that it creates a deep sense of fundamental self-loathing and hatred that I think gets people into really unhealthy places. And I mean, I'm still working it out. And I actually think it's present in like pretty much all of American culture. That I think we have a very deep rooted mistrust of ourselves because of a certain form. I mean, people argue all the time that's not what total depravity means, but it's a certain form of total depravity that it's the one that I was explicitly taught. That essentially like everything about us is bad, and the only reason that God loves us is Christ. And like even that I can get on board with, but not in a sense where like I don't exist. You know what I mean? Like I have to exist in that. It's not as if God only loves Jesus and that I am just this thing.
Well,
I don't know.
You are the vehicle by which God glorifies himself, because the object of his love is himself. That's the problem with the theology.
Yeah, and that's not even completely wrong, because like this is, I mean, listen, I know all this. John
It is
Piper, God
completely
is,
wrong, Luke.
this is
I disagree.
John Piper says this, right? God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him.
But it's
That is
because
all true. That is all true. But then my question is, you can't have a whole system of theology that discounts the being of us and we in that whole phrase.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
I don't know.
but- yeah. Okay. We shouldn't get off on this little rant. I think.
But it's tied to all this. It is tied to an extreme. So my experience, it's tied to an extreme left-brainedness. That's a very closed system, because this is the thing about the left brain. I don't know if you guys talked about this. Is like, it's Jonathan Peugeot. It's a 666. It's a totalizing
Yeah,
system. The left brain cannot, when you get into and Peterson talks about this with like self-deceit. When you lie to yourself, you actually poison your very organ for being able to self-correct.
Well,
And when your left brain,
Oh, sorry.
Huh?
You're probably what you're doing when you're lying to yourself, just dawned on me, is that you're building up that capacity of the left brain to think of itself as a master, right? Because
yes,
the left hemisphere doesn't know what it doesn't know. So
absolutely.
right. So the more you lie to yourself, the more the truth doesn't exist for you, actually.
I don't think that.
Right.
I don't think for the right brain even the concept of master exists.
No, not for the right brain. No, it
No.
doesn't. But
Which
here's
is why it's so
my-
easy for the left brain to become the master.
Yeah.
But here's my point with like having a conversation with a reformed person, or I'll say it this way. Here's how a conversation would go with my current self, with myself from 10 years ago. It wouldn't be a conversation with a person. It would be a conversation with somebody who is ideologically possessed, because someone where the left brain is the master is ideologically possessed, because it's a closed system. You actually have formalized and systematized a way anti-revelation. Nothing can come from the outside to correct your map.
Because
the map is everything.
Because Luke, you're not seeing yourself as a person in that system.
Mhm.
You're just an individual. You're not a person. You're not a person, because you can just you can just be I'm just worried about my own salvation fate. Like, I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I am saved, and my salvation is not caught up with the salvation of anyone else. And if they
that's because salvation is viewed, completely individualistically.
Correct.
Yeah. Right.
This is the root of it. This is the root of the problem. It does not understand what a person is.
Mhm.
Well, it doesn't understand unity and multiplicity. Then
Well,
that
the
being
thing is,
intrinsic to personhood. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly.
If God is using you as a vehicle by which to glorify himself, then you are actually objectified by
You're an
God.
object, and so is
You're an
Yes. Well,
so
yeah.
And there's no reciprocal, like what Jess was talking about before, interrelational reciprocal becoming, because you're not in relation.
But that God is an object too, because that God is not acting relationally.
Well, that's
Therefore,
right.
therefore, the entire world is in fact a world of dead objects. Like, all that nihilism is this kind of theology taken to its logical limits.
Yeah.
Nihilism has to be built on the foundation of nihilism is this kind of theology.
Right.
And it begins.
So do you think the meaning crisis is because of Calvinism?
It begins by having its beginning error is having a univocal understanding of being that collapses the distinction between being and becoming. Ironically, it actually suffers from the same error as open theism or process theology, but from the opposite viewpoint. The problem with process theology is that it only takes the point of view of of creation, and the problem with Calvinism is that it only takes the point of view of this idol God, and it doesn't understand what the proper relationship between being and becoming is. So
Well,
for process
it
theology,
can't
it's
handle
all
the paradox.
for process theology, it's all becoming. For Calvinism, it's all ultimately being, which is why it's deterministic, because everything is fixed.
Yeah, but this is where I would push on it. They don't even have being. I mean, you have to have unity and multiplicity to have being. There has to be I, thou, and bridge. There has to be
Yeah, it
something
will ultimately
other than,
collapse.
in order
Yes, right,
for,
precisely. This is why I said this is when I say it collapses into denialism. That's what I mean. That's exactly what I'm saying. It doesn't,
because there's actually
because when you try to cling to being in that absolute sense, it
You lose your
collapses into
life.
nothing. Well, yeah.
If you
and
save
even
your
God
life,
has
you will
redeemed
lose it.
even that.
Okay, so this book here, The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth, is written by a guy who came out of a very strict Calvinist tradition. Okay, and his first sentence in here, Luke, is, "This book is an attempt to discover for myself what I am and what I amount to." Why did he ask that question? Why do you think he asked that question? I said this to Nate and James. I said, I know exactly why he wrote this book. Because
so keep going, sorry.
He doesn't have it. There's no reason for him to exist in the
No,
world.
I see
Right.
that. I see that. But like here's the thing. I have an inner Calvinist. I've sat through
Need to exercise
I've
that.
sat through, well, I mean, it's just part of my consciousness Congress. I mean, I've listened to thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours.
I have an interpentecostal too, Luke. I mean,
Right.
it's not
Right. So my point with that is, like, read that line again, Shari.
Mm-hmm. All right, coming right up.
Douglas Harding's point, yeah.
This book is an unconventional attempt to discover for myself and in my own way what I am and what I amount to in the universe. What am I? That is the question. That's what he says. Let me try to answer it as honestly as I can.
So I know that culture and what the cultural response, the canned kind of response of what you would say, what I 10 years ago would have said to that question would be like, well, you're starting with man, you're starting with you're not starting with God, and there's your error. They would call that an anthropomorphic, they would call it a humanist theology, a humanist thing. And they're saying you're not, you need to start with God and his glory, or else you'll misunderstand everything. You won't understand yourself without starting with God. I mean, that's what they would say.
How can you?
But that's because, and that's not actually wrong, because you are the image of God.
What is I agree. And see, here's the thing, is like they would affirm also.
I wouldn't say that you can't really do that though.
Well, no, it goes sideways because it stops short, right? Like, so anyway, I lost my train of thought.
Well, the first question what would be the Calvinist definition of God then would be the first thing that I would, because I don't even see how that's even possible.
Where do you see it going sideways? I'm just curious.
Luke?
Me?
Yeah.
Did I say well, so what going sideways? I lost the antecedent.
No, I was asking Nate.
Nate, okay. I just don't even see. I'm saying to me it's a nonsense statement. Like, sure. it's like okay, so what is God? What do you think God is? If you're saying start with God, I'm saying okay. What does that mean? What do you mean by
God?
Right,
and even can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay, so this is, I'll bring up this quote again because I love to bring this up to people who are within this culture and tribe. And because I think it's true. It's really wonderful. I'm sorry if I can find it really quickly. Because, okay, here we go. So without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. Our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected by many ties, it is not easy to determine which of the two proceeds and gives birth to the other. And that is a quote by John Calvin.
So, right, okay, that's fine. So, but
What does he mean by that? Like, you know, like what is, when he says you can't know God unless you know yourself, what does knowing yourself mean to him?
Well, right. I think he's acknowledging
that
that
seeing
that's something
yourself
that's
as-
true.
Seeing yourself as a filthy rag, and then when you see yourself as a filthy rag, then you understand God better as being, you know, someone who doesn't see you actually anymore, but as a filthy
See, this
rag.
is, well, it's where the theology, like, it's the systems. I mean, this probably goes back to like our render unto Caesar talk, and I think this is fundamentally true within our what we called our non-utopian Christian anarchism. Is Christianity is fundamentally relational. It's
Yes.
not a system.
Mhm.
And so when you want to make something a system, so like take systematic theology and have this completely mapped left-brained theology, this is where Calvinism falls to bits, I think, is because even though it has a lot of good points and a lot of good intuitions, like theoretically, it is a system of a bunch of parts that fit into a whole, but they don't work. So when you start asking questions like this, this is where I genuinely, like, this isn't a rhetorical gotcha question. When I was having that conversation with Cal and Michael, I really know. I want to know. I want to talk to a philosophically trained Calvinist and just be like, what is a man in a Calvinist frame? What are they? I don't think that they have a good way to explain unity and multiplicity. I don't think they do.
Right, because like there's no, okay, look, okay, here's the thing. This is why I kept asking, like, what is God then, right? Because God, to use the classical phrase, is a relational substance. God already, like, God's being is involved in the very concept of relation.
Yeah.
And we are created in the image of God. You are also a fundamentally relational being. So when you ask that question that Harding starts with, what am I? If you are just, if you honestly go within the self to find the answer, if you do that, you find out when you get to your ultimate substratum, that ultimate substratum is ultimately nothing, right? But you are ultimately just empty space. And you only come into being by being in relation with something. We make space for one another. Our existence is inherently relational. It is the relations that actually are most fundamental, which MacGilchrist is going to get to like later in a segment that we haven't played here, and that's fundamentally right. But that's not. I mean, that's like that goes all the way back to like the very earliest parts of like the Christian Neoplatonic tradition. Like Augustine is pointing at that. Why is that? How is it that as fundamental as that relation? Do they just like read all of Augustine, but not De Musica? Like, how is it the Calvinist theology loses that fundamental importance of relationality? Or maybe it does have it.
No, to bring it back to MacGilchrist, it's because, and to the very first clip we played about subjectivity and vision and salience, and and that we all fundamentally see different worlds because we all are individual persons that have individual values, and what we value springs forth. And so that's what we see, while other people see other things. And so when that happens, but this is what happens within the Calvinist thing, is they will read all of Augustine, but they will only see the things that comport to their map.
Because the left hemisphere, what it
Yes.
doesn't exist.
Right.
Doesn't
And
exist.
because they're fundamentally, but like, this isn't something to let the Calvinists off the hook a little bit. This isn't something that is just unique to Calvinism. It's unique to neoconservatives and neoliberals and woke people and trans activists.
Any system.
Yes.
Any ideological possession, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which
Right,
Christianity is fundamentally not.
which is why this is why John Vervaeke's project cracks me up, because like if you really like, if you are thinking about Christianity in proper terms, Christianity is already the religion that is not a religion. Because what Christianity
Yes.
is a call into a mode of being
Right.
that is radical relationality. That's what it is. And in as much as you are living into that mode of being, you are Christian. And in as much as you are not living into that mode of being, you are not Christian.
Yeah. He who does by the law without the law what the law prescribes is fine. I think St. Paul said that.
Yeah. Right. Well, yes. Right.
Jess, what do you think? You haven't spoken forever because all of us excitable people are.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Man, there's something about this conversation that just tires me, man. I'm just like throughout, like my growing up was like evangelical Protestant, but it was more on the charismatic side of things rather than, and I had zero interest in any of this stuff, like to learn it, to like, I really don't care about what John Calvin said or the reformers. Like, I don't have any interest in it. I don't have any interest in it at all, other than like, you know, other than, I don't know, it wears me out. Like, you can play back the video. I probably yawned like 5 times.
No,
You know
I
what?
understand.
I
I
think-
actually, okay. So Jess, I was raised Pentecostal, and I feel exactly the same way. And like, there's a lot of frustration for me in this conversation too, because it's just like, it's very, very hard. Like when someone just doesn't see like how harmful something is, like how do you communicate that? Like what can you do?
I think it's like Shari was hitting at the point again, was like the left brain doesn't know what it doesn't know.
Right.
How do you get the right brain's attention?
Well,
if the left brain's focused, you can't necessarily divert the focus. So you do it through the, maybe childlikeness. You do it through surprise. You do it through something unexpected. You do it through even something like creativity, shocking someone, like that will get them to divert their attention. And if you can be like, how does this fit in your frame? And then they have to. But this naturally happens. If you have too tight of a system, something will happen in your life that will do that. So it's not necessarily something that we have to do, but it's interesting to think about in having these kind of conversations. If you get locked tight into a systematic conversation with someone, to try to be playful and try to tell a story about sometime when I was in awe and wonder, because then you're just like, you're not playing the game anymore. And so you're just like,
and this is, Jess, this is why that's so important, is because all those things, playfulness, humor, childlikeness, all of that, those are modes of being that are relational. They're not just propositional. They have they are mosaic. There's many things going on in playfulness and humor. There it is.
Well, you know,
Okay,
I will say, I will
And
give
so-
you one.
and so, but like,
I'll tell you
because
what.
here- one more thing.
Okay.
One more thing is so this is what I would argue. This is the problem, is I think it's really easy for us, because we are Western, to want to cast out Satan by Satan. So we'll want to point out the logical absurdity of Calvinism and why it doesn't work propositionally and logically, and they will not hear that.
Well, no
just
one's
said it.
ever-
Their left brain will not hear it.
No one's
And
ever.
so what you have to love them. You have to play with them. They have to trust you. The only way they will see it is through relationality and trust. That's
Yeah,
the only
and
way
there-
I will, anything I'm wrong about, that's the only way I'll see it.
Yeah, and there's a
That's-
way in which their right brain is satisfied somehow with the completeness of their system, and so by disturbing it, you're you know, systems are beautiful in a way. If you have a
Yes.
complex, and this is the trap that very intelligent people get into, is that they'll systematize things down to the point where it all seems to work. There's even
There's no paradox.
there's no paradox, and where do you get surprise? Where's the awe and wonder? Where's the childlikeness anymore? And there is a beauty in a system that works tightly and everything fits, but it doesn't provide a place to live in.
Right.
Nothing can live inside of it.
Right.
And what we're really looking for is a space, actually more than to live, to be and become. And a tightly system, like, where do you grow? You reach the edges of it. Well, it's an egg. You got to break that open, and then you become a chicken or whatever.
Like you were saying, Cass, earlier that you find this kind of conversation boring.
Well, not the conversation, just the.
Well, no, I mean the
Yeah,
topic. The topic.
I think
right?
he meant he finds me boring. That's what he meant.
No,
No, I don't think so.
no. Well, I mean, I get it, because, if you didn't grow up, and that's almost an oxymoron, because you can't really grow in this kind of environment, okay? Then, so I can say, I know from what Luke said earlier, that this is a concern of his. I know that it's a concern of mine. I know that it's a concern of Douglas Harding's. We're all asking the same question.
Mhm.
Who am I? What am I?
Mhm.
What is man? Okay. And why do we ask that question? Because we don't, in that kind of tight system that you were talking about, there was no opportunity to become. And as a living organism, spiritually and physically, that's what you're doing. You're becoming something, right?
Yeah.
So you're totally constrained in this place, in this theology, and you underdevelop,
Right.
in a sense. You do.
Well,
You
And
underdevelop.
as much because as long as you're in as much as you are trying to grasp and apprehend and seize that identity for yourself, it won't be real.
No, it's
because
not.
it has to be received as gift, and it's ultimately a gift that it's a gift that we receive from one another and from God. It's a gift that is received in relation. That's
And you
where
don't deserve it. And you
and you
don't
right,
deserve
exactly.
it.
Right. But the relation is more fun to, but the relation is, but yes, but it's not deserved because it's a gift. That's the nature of gift. It's not deserved because you're a piece of shit. Far from that. If you refer to yourself as a piece of shit, you are in, as far as I'm concerned, that is a denial of God.
Yeah.
Because God is love. God is a relational substance.
Well, he made you.
Right. And you are denying the very nature of God in making that move. It is actually the most atheistic thing you can do.
So and then Jess talked about playfulness and humor and childlikeness. And there's a quote, a George MacDonald quote, and he uses the verse where Jesus takes the child on his knee and says, "Except you be like a little child," right?
Right.
And it's because there's a conversation happening beforehand with the disciples about winners and losers. Winners and losers, okay? And that's that dualistic thing that MacGilchrist talks about, right? Of this dualism that we have to contend with all the time. And Jesus takes the child, which represents playfulness and innocence and lack of culpability, let me say that again, okay? And he puts the child on his knee and he does a shock and awe campaign, okay? That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
And MacDonald says this, and I just want to read this as a short quote.
Go for it.
He who receives a child, then in the name of Jesus, does so perceiving wherein Jesus and the child are one. What is common to them? He must not only see the ideal child in the child he receives, that reality of loveliness, which constitutes true childhood, but he must perceive that the child is like Jesus, or rather, that the Lord is like the child, and may be embraced, yea, is embraced by every heart, childlike enough to embrace a child for the sake of his childness. I do not therefore say that none but those who are thus conscious in the act partake of the blessing, but a special sense, a lofty knowledge of blessedness belongs to the act of embracing a child as the visible likeness of the Lord himself. For the blessedness is the perceiving of the truth. The blessing is the truth itself, the God-known truth that the Lord has the heart of a child. The man who perceives this knows in himself that he is blessed. Blessed because it is true. And
Yeah,
you know,
I love that, Shari.
Yeah.
And MacDonald was a Presbyterian. So just in case you think we're picking on Reformed people in general.
Yeah, he was not an Orthodox Christian or a Catholic.
MacDonald wasn't a Calvinist.
Well, but when you're talking, but here's the thing, though. It's like, here's the thing, and you know, David Bentley Hart is Orthodox, and he refers to MacDonald as Saint George MacDonald.
Yes.
Like, and that's the thing is like when you're talking about the real thing, about living into that radical relationality, the denominational barriers don't mean anything anymore.
No.
It's just, oh, that's a real Christian.
I guess
and you know what? We all know that too. We know it when we see it. Like, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what like tradition that person identifies with at all, because we know it when we see it.
Yeah, it's just the name.
And it's the right brain that knows it. It's not the left brain.
That's
why, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's that Robert Irwin quote that I love all the time is seeing is forgetting the name of the thing one sees. Like when the Christian isn't like all the denominational lines disappear when you're seeing it truly, because it's not. And then again, like this is where a dualist will say like, oh, like Luke's saying it doesn't matter if you're Orthodox. That's not what I'm saying. Like get out of your dualistic frame of thinking. I'm saying everyone who is a Christian is one, and your category, your label, your thing that you want to put on that in your left brain thing isn't ultimate. And so do I think, and that doesn't mean, and Sam said this to me the other day, like he said that that's just punting to some kind of like spiritual church that is invisible and behind and veiled and stuff. And I'm saying, no, the church is physical. It's the Orthodox Church. There it is. But that doesn't mean that like it is just that thing. Like what is that phrase that Dave always says is like, we know who, it's some like famous Orthodox quote. It's something like, we know who is in the church. We don't know who is not. No, what is it? I don't know. I can't think of it right. But essentially it's like, yeah, I'm really not evangelical in this sense anymore, that I'm a like conversionist. I don't think to be a Christian is to think about things the same way as me. I don't think that it's to adopt the titles that I adopt. It's not identitarianism. It's not replicas. I don't think being a Christian is being just like identical machine replicas of each other. I
Yeah,
think
well-
it is being your
Well,
own
I would,
personal version
Right.
within a unity.
Well, I
It's
would say
multiplicity and
this.
unity.
if our focus is on participation and relation, when we are relating and participating, it is all the same God that we're relating and participating with. Like I would say that, like, when Christians let's say when Christians are not engaged in radical or in logical argument with one another and disputing about propositions. Let's say you have a group of Christians and they're all singing in church. They're all singing to the same God.
So
They're all participating in the same God. Like, there's in that moment where you're just like in the hymn and you're singing and you're worshiping, everyone is worshiping the same thing because there is only one God to be
like
in relation with and to participate with.
yeah,
Say
but
we're
at the
all
same
singing that
time, though,
Gnostic hymn, "I'll Fly Away."
at the same time, though, to get
They're
back to
still participating in the same God, though.
Sorry, Shari, I made a joke.
to get back to the MacGilchrist thing, at the very beginning, he talks about we're creating the world through attention, right?
Yeah.
And then I referenced John Vervaeke's Luther episode. That is a world created through attention. That's what that is. That's what he demonstrates. He shows how we withdrew ourselves from God because our attention was misdirected, right? And that attention, this question of what is man, right? Even the psalmist asks, who is man that thou art mindful of him, right? He has that same question. Who am I to, why am I important? Because you know what? We know that we are important. We know that we're valuable. We know that we have a role to play. And that is the thing that we need to walk into, right? And when you are living in a system that constrains you from moving forward in that and answering that question, who am I and what role do I have to play? Then you withdraw yourself from God.
Right.
That's what you do.
Well, yeah, with the modes, I would say, and Luke will like this, because I would say that the modes of attention that are available to you are ultimately mammon or communion. It's like you're either attending to things as mere objects, or you're attending to things as subjects with which you are in communion.
Yeah, the only choices are Christ and Antichrist, and even the choice of Antichrist is a non-choice choice that is fading away.
Because it
So,
has
I'm a universalist.
because it ultimately has no being. It's a probatio boni. It's not real.
You actually can't even choose that. So eventually, like that, yeah.
All right. So shall we move along to the next segment?
I gotta
Yeah.
get going.
You guys
Okay.
do that. I have to go too.
All right. Well, we'll
Sorry.
just wrap it
But
up.
we
We'll
can-
just call this part one, and maybe
We'll do part two.
Maybe do a part
Yay.
two.
Yeah, let's do part two.
All right. Thanks
Yeah,
everyone
this was fun.
for joining me. Yeah, I knew this was going to be like, there's a lot. We didn't even get through even close to. So maybe Michael will be able to join us next time.
Yeah.
All right.
He was.
It's
he was
all
great.
the things.
Great conversation,
Bye.
guys. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thanks a lot, Nate.